Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Two Way Tonight. I'm Mark Halperin. Thank you for being here. We have two big stories, the same big stories we've had most of the week, Maine and Iran. And then six or so other really interesting stories, some new polling to share with you, the Georgia gubernatorial and Senate races. There are a number of states that have both governor's races and Senate races. And sometimes there's no connection between them, but sometimes in this age of a little ticket splitting, political professionals will tell you there's a real big connection. And I believe that's true in Georgia. It's true in Iowa. We'll see if it's true in Maine and Michigan. But these are all states where I believe what some professionals are saying, which is you got to really understand the dynamics. It's about turnout operations. It's about advertising. It's about which pair is more in sync. And it's about what region of the state they're from, et cetera. So we're talking about the Georgia races. Stock market baffles me again today. I'm confident our guests can explain why the Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ all went up today and oil went down. Thank goodness our guests are here to explain that because I can't. But they'll be here in a minute. And the Palm Beach Airport, which I've flown in and out of many times, which is it's crazy close to Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it's wonderful. It's like having like their local airstrip there. It's been renamed. It's no longer PBI. It's now DJT. And you can imagine the president and his team super excited about that. All that and more coming up on our program tonight with three great guests. And we're going to start on Iran in a moment. I'm going to do a quick word from a sponsor, and then we're going to dig in on Iran. And as always on the program, what Two Way is about is your participation as well as a conversation like no other. So please, if you're here on the platform, you'd like to participate, raise your hand. You'll do it if you do get called on with peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace in your heart for all others. And if you're watching on X or YouTube, friendly reminder: please don't put smack in the chat. Every night I have to go online and write the smack by hand. I have to copy down every word like I'm Bart Simpson, and it's giving me writer's cramp. So please, no smack in the chat. Thank you for that. Okay, first sponsor of the night is our friends at Cozy Earth. If you sleep perfectly, if you never have any problem sleeping, and if you love your sheets, if you look forward to getting in bed and having skin to sheet contact with your sheets, stop listening to me now. Go do Wordle if you haven't done it yet. I did it in 2 today. It was a fluke, but I did. If on the other hand, you're not getting perfect night's sleep, I recommend you go to CozyEarth.com, use the promo code Two-Way, and get 20% off the bamboo sheet set. They're extraordinary sheets. I have them now. There's one bed in my house that doesn't have them, and I pity the fool who sleeps in that bed. I won't say who it is. It's not me, though. Cozy Earth sheets are different than any sheets you've ever had. Viscous from bamboo. They're super comfortable, and you can return them after you try them for 99 days and decide you don't like them. You say, Mark, you were wrong. My old sheets were better. You send them back, and if you keep them, you get a 10-year warranty on sheets. Kind of incredible. Breathable, soft, and built for summer. Head to CozyEarth.com. Use the promo code Two-Way to get 20% off the sheets or anything else on the site. Mention you heard about it right here on Two-Way. Thank you. All right. Let's bring in our guests in a moment to talk about Iran. And one of our guests is, I'd say, one of the world leaders on the topic, and couldn't be happier to have him here. Stand by, because I'm having a little bit of problems with my, here we go. Behnam Ben Taleblu is here, and he's joined us before, and just such an expert. I got 100,000 questions to ask you. The show is an hour, and I've already wasted some time telling bad jokes. So thank you for being here. I'd love your. What do you? Let's start this way, and we'll bring the other guests in while you're talking. What's giving you optimism about a good outcome, and what's making you pessimistic about a good outcome?
Well, first, Mark, great to be with you as always, and as well as with your viewers and listeners. Look forward to the comments and questions. Great question, because it really is a fork in the road moment for the Trump administration. What's giving me optimism is that the president realized there was a need for a course correction. His rhetoric about a day and a half ago, particularly alongside the NATO summit, seemed to signal that. He's not letting the Islamic Republic get a free lunch here. If you look at the MOU, the deal between the US and Iran for 60 days, there's only 14 points. It's about a page and a half. The vast majority of the things there are incumbent on us. The one thing that was incumbent on Iran is basically keep the Strait open, don't harass shipping, and they couldn't even do that. So the president, what gives me optimism? He's willing to call a spade a spade. He's willing to respond to Iranian violence. He's willing to actually let them come out of the box and then slap them down for it. So he seems to understand power dynamics better than ever, regardless of the 40-day war, regardless of the 67-day ceasefire, and regardless of the 4 M's that unfortunately constrain him: markets, media, munitions, and midterms. But what gives me pessimism is the salience of those 4 M's, that they're still there, and that Iran's strategy isn't about defeating America. Iran's strategy is about playing up those 4 M's. The political concerns, given the, you could even say politely, civil war in the Republican Party over Israel, Iran, isolationism, internationalism. The munitions crisis, the Iran war is the second war that really the alarm bell should be going off on in terms of our domestic defense industrial base not having what it needs. In terms of markets, you mentioned the ups and downs of the stock market versus the oil market and the spot oil price. I mean, this is something that has behaved really cowardly in response to the Iran crisis. I have lots of reasons why, but the regime has now found a way to drill and drive and spook shippers and insurers and oil prices in a way that we haven't seen before, and that gives me more pessimism. And then finally, is media. I see some real cognitive dissonance from the media on Iran, particularly those who are willing to go to Iran during this quote unquote mourning period for this so-called supreme leader's funeral. And so, the president is at a fork in the road. Optimistically, he's willing to course correct. Pessimistically, this is a regime that's playing to the edge and taking advantage of the 4 things that force the president to have to pause the conflict to begin with.
So brilliant. Again, I consume so much media. I haven't heard a better explanation of where things stand than that. So thank you for that. Steve Cortes is here, Republican strategist. Last time Steve was on, his, I'll call it a soliloquy, but not, in a positive way, about where we stood in Iran was breathtaking to me. And so, Steve, no pressure, but I'd love you to annotate what Behnam said and where you think we are.
Sure. Well, as I said last time, and I think this is still the case, the United States took a very big bet. We made a gamble that a massive air assault, effectively a blitzkrieg air war, would ignite regime change in Tehran. That didn't happen, clearly. And if anything, the regime seems stronger than ever. Well, when plan A doesn't work, you have to pivot. So it seems as though the only way to get regime change there is all-out invasion. That's a political impossibility in the United States. Just not even remotely possible. Even what we are doing right now is incredibly unpopular, a relatively limited war. And what I see in my polling, though, I don't pretend to be a military genius, okay, but I do like to think I'm an authority on campaigns and polling. And what I know going into the midterms is that America was already in a very sour mood because of the economy. Americans hate this war. They do not believe in it. It was never sold to them. It was never sold to them that the nuclear Iran is an imminent threat to the United States. And as soon as things didn't go well, particularly regarding prices that they're paying at the pump, at the grocery store, Americans really turned on this war. So there is no political support, none in the United States, no consensus for sustained sacrifice, for an ongoing, dragged out war. And I think that's why, and I know we're going to get into my polling, I finally got a ray of light for those of us on the Republican side in my most recent poll, after just a string of poll after poll getting worse and worse for the president, for the GOP, on economic sentiment, on overall confidence. Finally, the poll I took just before July 4th, we got a major lift. Why? Well, I think it's because June was pretty peaceful in the Middle East. Markets came down to reality. Oil crashed really from over 100 all the way down to 70, where it roughly is right now. It had been as high as 112 based on this current oil contract. When you go from 112 to 70, people start to see that at the pump. They start to get confident again. They start to believe in the pre-war economic trajectory, which was actually excellent and was, I think, going to be boded well for President Trump into November. So that's the political reality, I believe, of where we are. And it's my hope and expectation that this near-term flare-up in the Gulf is not a restart of where we were in March and April at sort of all-out war and oil soaring. The American people have no time for that. And if we persist with that kind of a agenda that we had in March and April in the spring into November, the Republicans are going to have a miserable day come the November election.
Thank you for that. We'll get to your poll and a little later in the program. I want to talk about Iran here. First of all, can either of you explain why the stock market went up today? Some analysts are saying it's because the president claimed the Iranians called him and said they really want a deal. Is that really
I think it's
enough
exactly
for these sophisticated traders? Donald Trump says he got a phone call and that's enough for them?
Well, it's amazing how much they hang on every word, traders. So, I was a trader, bond trader, not an oil trader, but I was a bond trader for 25 years before I got full-time into politics. And I still have a lot of contacts and friends, very senior folks in the hedge fund world. Talk to them today. And at least according to them, that is exactly what gave them confidence, was Trump saying, hey, Iran called, they want a deal. I think, though, also, and this part I think is more sophisticated, what I think traders realize and investors realize, which I think is accurate, is that Donald Trump's own view of this war has changed dramatically, right? In other words, he was highly confident going in. And remember, he was coming off the high of really successful foreign interventions, particularly the capture of Maduro, right? Which was just magnificent and superbly executed, praised uniformly. And I think he went in with a high, expecting that kind of result, that there really was going to be regime change relatively quickly in Tehran. Once that didn't happen, and once he started seeing the polling, all right, and no matter what he says publicly about not believing polling, he believes credible polling, okay? And he knows how unpopular this war is.
Yeah.
And he is desperate now, I think, for a way out with honor, the best way out possible, but a way out. And I think Wall Street is increasingly aware of that Trump is realistic, and that he knows that we cannot wage war the way we were in March and April alongside Israel into November and expect anything but an electoral disaster.
Yeah. When the MOU came out, a lot of us read it and said, there's too much ambiguity here, and the Iranians will interpret it their way on every point. So that if you took it at face value on the parts that were not ambiguous, it was mostly a good deal for Iran. And if you took the ambiguous parts and assumed Iran would interpret it its way, it was a great deal for Iran. And one of those provisions is the provision, paragraph 5. And here's what Shelby Holliday of the Wall Street Journal just tweeted. A U.S. official familiar with negotiations said the U.S. and Iran are on, quote, different planets when it comes to interpreting paragraph 5. Notably, it says nothing about the U.S. making arrangements for the safe passage of vessels, which Iran has seized on. CENTCOM just did a fact check. Iran media says we control the strait, and CENTCOM says no, they don't control the strait. Different reports about how much is going through, but it's not open. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board says, well, the president should open it and blockade the Iranians. Behnam, what's good in the MOU right now, or is it not serving any good purpose at this point?
There's two differences I think the audience should know. There's the ceasefire, and then there's the MOU itself. But before I get into that, I'm certainly not a stock trader or a bond trader, but let me tell you, if ever there was a vindication in life that the stock market is a graph of rich people's feelings and how divorced some of those feelings may be from the geopolitical reality, it is the market situation from February 28th till today. I think not only are Iran and America on two different planets, the market and the regional reality are operating entirely on two different planets. Unfortunately, this is something that the president is going to have to contend with. I do believe your other guess is correct here, that there are real limits, political limits, economic limits to what can be done. I think the month of February between the protests and the start of the war was totally squandered in terms of helping to create the optics and to sell the American public on why this is necessary. But there is no larger sacrifice theme. And in the absence of that larger sacrifice theme, the way the war was conducted and the way the peace seems to have been lost with the MOU has compounded that, both at the pump, both for your average American, as well as in terms of this new market reality, where the only thing that will be rewarded, I fear, is America opening the strait at all costs, which brings us exactly to your question, which is the MOU. I actually think if you want to make a charitable case for the MOU, it is Donald Trump charging his national security team with saying, get the strait open at all costs. He rightly understands, because of those 4 M's that we mentioned before, that there is a need for at least a pause. I actually don't think the war began as a regime change war. I think it's something that he's interested in. I think the president has a lot of sentiment about where to go with Iran. I don't think there's a lot of strategy about where to go with Iran. He's highly responsive to external stimuli. He's looking for the cheapest, easiest win. If that win is a deal, if that one is behavior change, if that one is regime change, he will go there. I do believe there was a recency bias from Venezuela, but I don't believe that had him totally locked in. You know, it's very odd to want a population to turn out during a war after they already turned out and already got slaughtered 40K. So I don't, the causal ducts in terms of expecting things don't align with that previous story. So moving forward with the MOU, it's not about paragraph 5. The Trump administration needs to sense that the strait is entirely open. Gulf Arabs need to sense that they can export oil freely. Shippers and insurers need to sense a de-risked environment. None of those three things are sensed. Therefore, the Islamic Republic is playing to the edge. It had a bad hand. It played a bad hand well. Now it's overplaying that hand, and the U.S. is responding. I actually don't think the U.S. will respond in a super sustained way up until you get to November. I think there'll be fits and starts of this, but there will be 3 ways to know that the MOU is really dead, which brings us to the ceasefire versus MOU. No one is respecting the ceasefire because both sides are using violence. But to really know the MOU framework, the whole 14 points is dead, is if you see America do one of those 3 things. And you mentioned one of them came from the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which was the blockade. One is the restoration of the blockade. That was the thing that caused a 90% nosedive in Iranian oil exports. 2.1 million in February, 1.15 million in March, 900,000 in April, and 64,000. Only 4 ships got past us in the month of May. That's why Iran was acting out. So that's the blockade. If the U.S. restores that, MOU is dead. Second thing is if the U.S. has new sanctions. Remember, there's a general license that was just essentially revoked. That is not new sanctions. That's the restoration of previously waived sanctions. And the third thing is if we bring new military forces into the region. Because the deal is heavily slanted towards Iran and more things are incumbent on us, this is from our perspective what it would look like for Americans to know if the American government chose to step outside of the MOU. For the Iranians, they're already outside that because of the harassment in the Strait, because there was very little in the MOU that binded them.
Thank you for that. Steve, you know the president well. I found his remarks yesterday basically saying, I'm done with the Iranians. They're not dealing in good faith. I found them pretty compelling. There's nothing to force the Iranians to give up their desire to monetize the Strait. There's really no leverage there. There's not much leverage on getting them to give up their nuclear material. There's not much leverage to get them to stop sponsoring terror. And there's leverage on the president because of the midterms and the price of oil. I think the days of saying their oil capacity is going to explode, or their days of saying the people are going to demand the war end, I just don't see any indication that the Iranians feel under much pressure. And certainly their swagger on social media and through public statements doesn't indicate they're feeling much pressure. So the president has, it seems, the Wall Street Journal thinks, others think, these 2 options. He has try to do the blockade / escort friendly ships through. So military-driven activity in the Strait. And then he can bomb them more or fire more missiles. Does he have other cards he can play, Steve, besides those 2?
Well, no, I don't believe kinetic cards, but the other card is get the absolute best deal possible. The least bad deal, really, is what I mean, right? Because again, you have to remember, we took our shot. It didn't work. Okay, we have to be realistic about this. The American people have no stomach, no tolerance.
I hear you, but I got to stop you. You say get a deal. There's really no deal the Iranians are going to give him that he can accept, and not anytime soon. I mean, there's no deal before the midterms because they haven't even started negotiating on the nuclear stuff, and that takes months, years.
Fine, but I guess when I say deal, then I mean at least enough of a pause, right? Enough of a pause. And for example, the Iranians violated the ceasefire, clearly, okay? But here's the thing about the Iranians is they're evil, but they're not dumb. They're very aware of what we're talking about here, right? They're very aware of American polling. They're very aware of the president's unpopularity generally going into the war, getting much worse because of the war, and his vulnerability to a Democrat House and what he will face with a Democrat House in the last 2 years of his presidencies. They're aware of all of that. And ironically, it's such a paradox, right? Because the United States goes in and militarily obliterates the leadership of Iran, kills their entire leadership structure, causes enormous damage to their country, establishes air supremacy almost immediately over the country, and yet the Iranian regime in many ways has more leverage in the situation than the United States does. But why? Because we are unwilling, clearly as a country, to take this further than aerial bombardment or perhaps a blockade. But even doing that, again, you send oil back up above $100 and we tank sentiment once again in this country. I just think it's politically untenable. I mean, look, there's no good option at this point, all right? The good option was not doing it in the first place, but we can't rewind the clock, okay? That is spilled milk. So at this point of bad options, we've got to try to pick the least bad. And to me, the least bad is essentially where we were a couple of days ago, which is a tenuous peace. Don't overreact when the Iranians inevitably do act up, which they're going to. But it's a difference between firing a couple of missiles versus an all-out drone assault on the Gulf states that sends oil prices absolutely soaring, bond market soaring, stocks tanking. That's a very different situation, which is what we had in March and April.
Understood. Behnam, we're going to let you go. We're going to move on to talk about Maine, but grateful to you as always for being on and sharing all your wisdom, and look forward to having you back.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Yemisi's here. Ladies and gentlemen, think about my two-way colleague Yemisi on Twitter regarding the Platner story. There's so much stuff on X about Platner, and frankly, there's too much. Here's the thing about Yemisi on this topic. Timely, principled, brilliant, and hilarious. So welcome in. I can't tell you how many people I get forwarded, like every one of your tweets, 5 people send to me, say, got to see this. Thank you for being here. Grateful to you.
Always good to be with you, Mark.
Let's talk. Let me just run through some news on Maine, and then I want to hear from both of you on it. Mr. Platner now, Axios is saying, he told his staff he's not going to file his papers to get off the ballot till the day of the deadline, Monday, which is going to have the Democrats sweating because the guy's mentality is such as no one can be sure he's going to do it till he does it. And maybe there'll be some problem with the paperwork. So there could be suspense until Monday. Lots of the candidates, more than a half dozen now, have announced they're going to run. And Maine did the first thing today that, in terms of the process for selection, that puts their finger on the scale a little bit away from the progressive wing, the populist wing of the party. As I understand it, the process they're going to use involves the selection of delegates, 500 of them to join the 100 or so members of the central committee of the party to make the pick. And there's still questions about how those people will be chosen, but they're allocated by county population. I believe there are 14 counties in Maine. The biggest county in Maine is the one around Portland. And so Portland, which is the least good area for Platner, allegedly, I'm not sure it's true, but they say that his strength is in the rural areas. That means that an urban area is going to have a disproportionate say in who's selected. So Yemisi, start there. If that is the process, and you tell me if you know otherwise, does that work against a kind of a Platner-like candidate, or not necessarily, because we know that a lot of urban white liberals like progressivism?
Yeah, I would be real with you. I've been to like the northern parts of Maine, but I've also done some very short vacations in Portland, Maine. And it's hard for me to imagine that they weren't enraptured by Graham Platner for different reasons. Maybe they didn't care that he was an oyster farmer, but I think his platform of the oligarchy, billionaires, corporations, Gaza, I think that hodgepodge of buzzwords definitely connected with the folks from Portland, Maine. I think the harder thing is how you disconnect Platner from the next candidate.
Right. Well, that's great. I want to talk about that. 2 questions for you both, and then they'll segue right into what Yemisi just raised. Number one, we don't know who the nominee is going to be yet, but without knowing that, would you say Democrat chances are the same, better, or worse making a swap? Steve, same, better, or worse?
Yeah, gosh, tough to tell, but my guess is the same, roughly, because the thing about Platner is, he cut both ways. I mean, he obviously had significant problems, right? I mean, massive problems. At the same time, very talented politician, right? Really compelling in a lot of ways, enormous charisma, a cult-like following in the state. So, but that comes with all of his very significant baggage. So my guess is, roughly the same. This is going to be a tough race no matter what. I think ultimately Susan Collins prevails in a tough race, but that's my analysis.
Okay, Yemisi, better, worse, or the same Democrat chances now?
I think the same too. I saw reporting, right, that the GOP was nervous now because Platner had been replaced, but But I think that's just mishigash. Susan Collins has come out time and time again, always around like 8.6% between her and her competitors. And I was a big supporter of Sarah Gideon, like back in 2020 when she was running. And I think Sarah Gideon to me was like the perfect Democrat to run. So I have a hard time with the candidates I see now being able to capture Graham Platner's fan base without getting labeled as like this pseudo supporter of Graham Platner and still clawing away at those independents.
Yeah, I'm with you. I talk about the Gideon example all the time. She really should have been the perfect candidate to beat Susan Collins. There's like nothing you would change, and yet she got beat. She got beat pretty roundly. My second question for both of you, again, Steve, first is, you have a sense of who the front runner is? Is there anything you see that makes you think you know who the Democrats will pick?
Mark, I don't. Listen, I think it's hard enough to understand my side, much less be an expert, really, on the other side.
Yemisi, who do you have your money on at Ladbrokes for this one?
I would love if Shanna Bellows, who is AG, pretty good in that moderate lane, pretty good in my lane. That's for me. Troy Jackson, though, is that buzzworthy name that everybody keeps bringing up. He's really in with the progressives. I'm sure Bernie Sanders will come right back up and do another rally with him as well. And he had already been on the stage with Platner and with some of the DC folks that were up there. So I would expect Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, and that whole group to start pushing towards Troy Jackson.
Okay. Turn your volume down if you don't want to hear the score of the World Cup match because somebody just scored. Turn your volume down. 3-2-1. Mbappe scored. France won. Is winning 1-0, and he missed a penalty shot in the first half. All right, turn your volume back up. I say that ironically because you can't hear me say it. You mentioned Bella. She also has lost to Susan Collins by even more than in the subsequent races. What makes you think that she'd be a stronger candidate now than when she got shellacked previously?
I don't think anybody who's coming up is going to be a stronger candidate than Susan Collins.
Yeah.
It's really about what I think is palatable because we now have a disaffected group of voters who, I'm going to give it to Platner. He inspired people who never really got involved in politics.
Yeah.
I thought a lot of the stories were inspiring of his supporters. And now these people who've kind of been a little bit brainwashed about the establishment and how the establishment wants to control everything because of Graham Platner's exit, they firmly believe that. He did not leave any room for anybody else to really build a really good campaign because he basically clouded his exit in conspiracy. And they're going to have to fight against that because he did his own party no favors.
All right, I'm asking both of you the question I've asked others, and maybe you'll think it's naive or stupid, or obvious. Why did this set of accusations come out right before the filing deadline? Why was it timed that way? These are events that occurred long ago. Yemisi, why did it happen right before? Was it purposeful to force him off? Is that?
I think people looked at the deadline and thought from the Democrat side, I could see people doing one big Hail Mary. I would assume, the Collins crew would want to keep Graham Platner because I am assuming there is more coming. But
the woman who's making the accusation was working with this woman who's an activist of sorts, and
Diane Hunt. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And neither of them has said I did this right before the deadline on purpose. And CNN didn't say that. Politico didn't say that. You know what I'm saying? Like, had this been right after the deadline, and it was a Republican, we would have said, well, they did it right after the deadline because they waited till after the deadline. Doesn't it seem obvious, Steve, what the timing is?
It does seem that way, but I will give you one alternative explanation, although it's just as cynical in a sense. Yeah. And that is that, the New York Times, I think, behaved really reprehensibly with this story, with what they released before the primary, because we now know, of course, that this woman was one of their key sources. They had this information. Yeah. So, and I think the New York Times has a lot of answering to do, by the way, because to me, what they performed was almost the public version of a catch and kill. In other words, they didn't completely kill it, or maybe you'd say, catch and maim. In other words, they got the story out, but in such a way where they tried their very hardest to mitigate the damage to Platner and to put it in the least bad light out there. For example, particularly the way they treated this particular accuser. So, an alternative explanation for why it came out now is that, this woman and perhaps some others that were sources in the New York Times story, they felt betrayed, quite frankly, by what the Times did and the way that they shaped the story, very clearly. So I think that's also an explanation.
Can I say too, the woman also thought the New York Times story was going to be enough. And quite frankly, I did as well.
Yeah.
And it was really disappointing when it wasn't. And then obviously he went on Chris Hayes immediately that same night. And a lot of people did damage like coverage for him. So.
Yeah. I know you guys can't speak for others, but I'm going to ask you, Yemisi, first, and Steve may pass because it's reading the minds of Democrats. Many people, including Yemisi and Melissa and others, Democrats, sensible Democrats, have come here and said, I didn't need more information. I saw the tattoo. That was enough. I saw the other accusations. That was enough. I took the measure of him. That was enough. I've raised the question of the motive of the accusations and the timing. Why did so many people flip? And they flipped within hours of the accusation. Did they flip because of the timing, or did they flip because for some reason this accusation, serious accusation, I'm not minimizing the accusation, but Yemisi, did they flip because they said we got to get him off now, it's clear, or did they flip because their moral outrage somehow grew of this accusation?
A lot of people texted me from October when the tattoo story came out, that this guy was a scumbag and this guy needed to go. Very few people said it out loud. And I think this particular accusation made people feel that they had the coverage to say it out loud.
So if this accusation had come forward a month ago, you think all these same people would have abandoned him a month ago?
I do think so. Yeah.
But Mark, I think here's an important point too that I think has to be exposed, which is that these office holders, donors, right, the people who turned, as you say, almost in unison, right, very, very quickly, that turned against Platner. We have to realize that they did subvert the will of the Democratic voters of Maine, right, who knew that extremely serious allegations existed, right? They knew about the tattoo. They knew about the women. They knew about all kinds of awful aspects of this guy's life, because I think almost everything about him is a fraud. Even his farm is a fraud. He's a hobby farmer. He's not a real farmer. But in any case, that's what I think of him. But the point is, tens of thousands, well over 100,000 Maine Democrats said, knowing all of this, he's our nominee. And the Democrats, quite frankly, aren't operating in a very democratic manner, just as they didn't in 2024 when Kamala Harris became the nominee without a single primary vote, just as they didn't in 2016 when superdelegates stacked the deck against Bernie Sanders.
If they have to replace somebody, they have to replace him. You're not going to have another primary.
Right, but my point is they shouldn't be intervening at all. I mean, look,
they didn't intervene. The guy they said they didn't support the guy anymore. He chose to step down. Well, I don't know. I see it a little differently. Can somebody check the CENTCOM's Twitter feed? I think there may be more strikes happening. We'll pull that up in a moment. I want one more question on Platner, and you may find this hypothetical to be uninteresting, but it's really been on my mind when I go back and look at just how easily he won the primary. And I go back and look at just how much all the candidates who are running, even the ones who are more moderate so far, they don't want Platner's endorsement, they've said explicitly, but they're adopting his agenda. Imagine this. Imagine if there was Graham Platner, no Reddit, no tattoo, truly an oyster farmer, sells his oysters to orphanages and gives them away to orphanages all over the state, and the exact same campaign skills and messaging. Okay? Now, that's a hypothetical, but it's not implausible, right? So, Yemisi, how would that guy be doing against Susan Collins? He'd be up 20 points, right?
Well, yeah, there is definitely an anger towards incumbents this year, towards anybody who feels like establishment. So I do think, look at John Cornyn in Texas. I do think you're working at a negative if you are an incumbent right now. Like, now is the time for upstarts to really try to get in there. Unfortunately, we picked a bad egg, but there was also, this election was always coming up. So it is also a part of my sweet dear establishment's fault that they picked Janet Mills. Like, you also, it's the same thing when folks picked Andrew Cuomo. You pick somebody, you say, no, this is the person we're going to run. And people look at them and go, I don't think so. I don't connect with them. They don't even feel like they want to run their race. And it leaves an opening for somebody who has energy, who has a different message, who feels new and fresh to come in. So a lot of this is also on Senator Chuck Schumer, my leader, on not catching the moment and the vibes.
Yeah,
Mark, I think you make an excellent point. That hypothetical Graham Platner, that version of him, would have waltzed into the U.S. Senate, right?
Yeah.
Given the current environment, given how angry voters are at the war, how angry they are at the economy, given that the Republicans are the governing party, and that Susan Collins, let's face it, is no spring chicken. So there are potential issues there. But this is the issue for the Democrats, right? And I need to call them out for this. They're on sort of this eternal quest to find this normal moderate, right? And they would particularly love if that normal moderate were a normal, white, straight male. But they cannot find those people. They thought they had it in Tallarico. They thought they had it in Platner. The point is, those people generally don't exist any longer because the Democrat Party is simply too radical to be a home to them.
North Carolina, Rob Sand is running in Iowa. Josh Turek is running too.
All
Sherrod
good
Brown's
examples.
running again in Ohio. We gotta like hopefully the money and the energy gets directed to like those. Ossoff's running.
Yeah.
Well, Ossoff is not normal in any sense. He's a radical, but.
Well, okay, but Steve, the reality is you think everybody in the Democratic Party is a radical, and Platner's, though, not a moderate. He may be moderate stylistically because he's ostensibly blue collar, even though.
Oh no, he's not a moderate. No.
He's not a moderate. He's far left. He's a socialist.
He was recommended by Maine's DSA chapter too.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, we could talk more about that, but let's move on. I want to talk about Georgia. You both have alluded to it. Here's Steve's new poll. Steve worked with our friends at WIC to do a poll in Georgia, and again, it's one poll, but WIC's a great pollster, and as Steve's pointed out, it's an interesting look at a very important battleground state with a Senate race and a governor's race. So here's Steve's poll number 15. Steve, walk us through it, please.
Sure. So I think this is very significant because I poll every single month, and I have gotten all of this year, and really even into last year, a stream of successively worse polls for President Trump and for the GOP. And it's just been a steady drumbeat of worsening sentiment, particularly on the economy, really took a dive once the war began. And this is the first time now that I see a material, very tangible uptick for Trump, for GOP candidates overall. And I think the main reason is this poll was taken right before the 4th of July is because, as I mentioned earlier, June was a pretty peaceful month for the war. Oil price, really not much happened in the Gulf. Oil prices crashed. People saw relief at the pumps. I think there's also some patriotic sentiment into America 250 that is tangible and real, especially in states like Georgia. So we saw President Trump's, to get specific, we saw his approve, disapprove come all the way into -8, which is actually quite good. I mean, that's a fairly normal rating for presidential approve, job approve versus disapprove. And to put that in context, North Carolina next door, which is probably the closest analog state to Georgia in many ways, my prior poll there was -14. And I was getting mostly in the -18, -20 in battleground state pollings on Trump job approval. I mean, dismal, really dismal ratings for Trump. We've gotten it into single digits now. I have Jackson leading the gubernatorial race, and I have Collins only -4 in the Senate race. So this is the first sort of breather for Trump, for Republicans based on my polling that I've seen in 10 months.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I've told you guys this many times. You put the poll back up, please. Every Republican who does private polling will tell you the same thing for the last 3 months. Wipe out for the Republicans if things stay the same, but there's time for things to change. And Steve's got a poll here that may suggest in this state things are changing. But the president's approval rating and the horse race numbers in the key contested races, House, Senate, and governor, right now in most places remain, as they've been for several months, a disaster for Republicans. And if you're a supporter of the Republicans and you want to put your head in the sand and say, oh, that's just media bias, that's just spin. No, it's the truth. And every Republican I know doing races has found what Steve has done. In this case, I think Steve's laid out a good argument for why this could be happening in Georgia. And of course, Georgia is, despite its recent presidential history, it is a red state. At the statewide level, it is a red state. Has 2 Democratic senators, a little bit flukish. We know the reasons why, but at the governor's level, it's been a red state for a while. Yemisi, you know the state well. What do you think the current status is of the Senate race and the governor's race there?
My home state. I think that the Senate race it's in Ossoff's bag. I mean, barring something radical happening, I don't see any way that he fails to Mike Collins. The Keisha Lance Bottoms, I think, is in a harder spot, and that is totally shown because. And I spent most of May back home in Georgia, and I went to an Ossoff rally, and every rally that he has in Georgia, he's bringing KLB along with him because she's kind of the drag here. And also, if we're going to be like Frank, if he's thinking about anything for 2028, you need to have the Democratic governor in order to leave the Senate seat.
Yeah.
So Ossoff, to me, no issues whatsoever. And can I say, he has just grown so much. He ran for Congress in my parents' district. And at the time, my parents were like, he's not from here. I don't know anything about him. To me, he's totally on brand messaging. His comms game is on point. He's like probably one of the best performers for Democrats right now.
Truly. But I ask you both this: ticket splitting. If Jackson's going to win, and most people I know in Georgia make him the favorite now, what's the profile, Steve, of a Jackson Ossoff voter? Who's that?
Right. I don't think that many of those voters exist, and in general, they don't exist. And here's another reason that I think Collins is going to win. And look, my poll tells me that he's just outside the margin of error, and he's a relatively unknown congressman, right, who was in a brutal primary fight where there was a lot of negativity about him. Of course, Ossoff didn't have a primary, so the fact that he's down 4, I think, is very significant. But also, we have in Jackson somebody who I think is going to win. And by the way, I only have him up 0.5%. So that's a horse race right now as well. However, what he has as an outsider and businessman is a massive war chest. He spent over $100 million of his own money on the primary.
And he didn't spend $100 million to win the primary, only to go cheap in the general.
Well, correct. And I'm told he's willing to spend as much as 3 times that much of his own money in the gubernatorial general election. And given that, what the effect that has for get out the vote, though that get out the vote operation that he can fund with that kind of an investment means that those voters are in all likelihood also going to vote for Mike Collins. I believe that once they get to know who Mike Collins is. His name ID is not great throughout the state, but with that top of the ticket, I think it gets there. And Ossoff, I think, is ideologically not well suited for a state like Georgia. I just think that's reality. He has political skills, but he's not ideologically aligned with the state.
Yemisi, I want to ask you about some more Georgia questions in a second, including what Steve just said, but I need to share a headline of a Wall Street Journal story that just ran. Iran has for years said they're going to try to kill President Trump, and in part because of his assassination of Soleimani. Wall Street Journal says Israel shared new intelligence with the U.S. that it said indicated a fresh Iranian plan to kill President Trump, a finding that would mark an escalation in the war. Iran for years has vowed to kill him. Back to Georgia, and we'll keep monitoring that. And there continue to be indications there might be kinetic activity going on in the region right now. The irony about Ossoff, he's performing so well, and you don't need to be a partisan to say that. His rallies are great. People have written about how sophisticated he is in social media. He's a great storyteller, but he is to the left of the state. I don't care what anybody says. He's to the left of the state. And Collins could end up being a pretty good candidate. He could benefit from the coattails of the gubernatorial candidate. Ossoff is not going to win by 5. It's just not in Georgia. So now he's down to 2 or 3. And I have Democrats who say to me, "Oh, Ossoff will win by 1 or 2." And what I say is 1 or 2 is too close for comfort. He could lose this race, even though he's the performer of the cycle for the Democrats. Let me show you the Polymarkets on both races, which show otherwise. Polymarket on the Senate race 17, please. Polymarket's doing these by party rather than by candidate. 87% chance they think Polymarket wagers say that Ossoff has an 87% chance to win. Polymarket wagers watch a lot of MS Now, by the way. And on the governor's race, this is interesting. 16. It's basically 50-50, 51%. The rounding gets them above 100% odds. But basically, governor's race they see as a toss-up, which is actually, I think, pretty good for the Democrat because I don't think most political people I know think she's even with Jackson at this point. So Yemisi, if Ossoff said, I heard you were on Halperin show, and he says I could lose, and he says, what do I need to worry about? What does he need to worry about?
He's got to make sure he maximizes the black vote in Georgia. If you can ride that wave all the way through. I mean, we're talking about Maine, we're talking about Georgia. And I always say a candidate like Graham Platner would have never survived in the Georgia Democratic Party. He has to galvanize those voters to their full extent. And they love him. They do. He really is. And you're right. He isn't like my most moderate pick, but he does know when to make concessions on things like the Lake and Riley Act. And also want to point out, Jewish guy.
Yeah.
has done a really good job weathering the wave of negativity that has washed
Yep.
over the Democratic Party. He's really misstepped a lot, stepped around a lot of that.
Yeah, well said. Okay, there's other topics I want to get to, but I want to make sure folks have a chance to ask both our guests a question, and Yemisi needs to leave a little early. So I'm going to do a quick word from a sponsor, and then to your questions. If you're here on the platform, would like to get in on the conversation, please raise your hand. Last sponsor of the night, our friends at Fast Growing Trees. If you've got a yard or you want more greenery inside your house, I recommend the good folks at Fast Growing Trees, America's largest and most trusted online nursery, over 2 million happy customers. It's a great thing. You just go on fastgrowingtrees.com. You can put in the promo code 2-way, you get 20% off, and just put in your zip code, and then you'll get online help. What you can buy that'll work where you live, inside or out, shows up in your house in a big old box. Open it up, and you got something there, a tree, a bush, a plant, whatever you order. And the online customer service is exceptional. They'll help you make sure that what you buy will grow with their Live and Thrive guarantee. It comes in very healthy condition, and unless you really purposely try to screw it up, it's going to flourish in your hands with their help. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com right now. Use the promo code 2-way and get 20% off everything on the site. Ordering's easy, delivered right to your door, as I said, and you get everything you need. Without having to load it in the car, I don't know about you, but whenever I buy from a brick and mortar nursery, I end up with soil in the back seat of my car. No one wants that. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com right now. Use the promo code 2-way. Great deals on spring planting essentials. Up to half off on some things, but at least 20% off everything on the site with your first purchase. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com and use the promo code 2-way. All right, questions for our guests, and then we might cover a few more topics depending on how the flow goes here. But let's start with Kelly. Kelly, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you live and what's on your mind for Steve and for Yemisi.
Hi, I live in upstate or Western New York, to be technical, outside Rochester, New York. And wow, I have so many, I would love to ask so many questions, but my question is kind of for Yemisi to start, and then Steve, I don't know if you read that Wall Street Journal article where they talk about how Platner, how he was vetted and nominated by like basically an activist lobbyist outside of the traditional like establishment process. So I guess my question is, is that happening elsewhere in the party?
Yeah.
And if they can kind of circumvent the process and use the primaries and how motivated and people are, does that prevent like a serious ongoing threat to the establishment parties?
Let me say 2 parts on his vetting is that one, vetting was not done to the highest ability that it should have been done, and a lot of those people that picked him have already said that, so that's disappointing. But also 2, on vetting, as somebody who's worked with research teams, the candidate also has to tell you a lot of stuff. Like you can figure out things, but
Yep.
there are certain paths you are never going to know that you should go down unless the candidate says, here is everything you need to know. And if the candidate does not treat you like a defense team for them, like truly that's what you are, working their campaign, then you're always going to fall into these pitfalls. And unfortunately for those who are anti-establishment, they're working with people who do not have the caliber that a lot of the machines that run good candidates do. So you're never going to get a strong vetting team if you're anti-establishment, because you're hiring people who are anti-establishment and therefore have never actually done the job.
Yeah, I covered Bill Clinton in '92, and he didn't tell his vetting team a bunch of stuff. And then somebody would break a story, and I'd say to the senior people, well, what's the truth here? And they'd say, oh, we don't know. We're trying to ask Governor Clinton, but he's busy, and he's putting us off, because typically it was stuff he didn't really want to talk about. The guys who recruited Graham Platner, Kelly's referring to one story, there have been several, it was like a casting thing. They went up to Maine and said, who can we cast who will be the right person? A new tweet from one of those guys, Morris Katz, young man who's gotten a lot of negative coverage. Here's his new tweet about how what he claims was his role in this end game. And he's been up in Maine. He's been spotted up there during this period. As soon as the team became aware of the rape allegations against Graham Platner, we advised he suspend his candidacy. And in the following days, worked to wind down the campaign. Like so many of his supporters, I'm deeply disappointed. Now, I will say about Mr. Katz's claim, recall, as Steve mentioned earlier, this allegation was made in the context of the New York Times story. Now, there's some dispute about it was made off the record, whatever it was, but I'm pretty confident that the allegation would have been relayed to the New York Times by the New York Times to the Platner campaign weeks ago, even though it wasn't in the article. And so I think Mr. Katz may need to revise and extend his chronology. Steve, what do you think of this notion of consultants candidate shopping? Is that a dangerous trend? Is it common in your party? Is that something that happens?
It's not nearly as common on our side, although it does happen, certainly. But the Republican side, in terms of primaries, tends to be way more rambunctious than the other side. But, I can tell you this, having been involved in campaigns, both, presidential and statewide, we use a lot of private investigators on our opponents and on our own side, right?
Yeah.
And we get fantastic information. Now, it's expensive. My guess is in this case, they either really didn't do what they said regarding investigations, or they were just cheap and haphazard about it, because I think good investigators would have uncovered most of this. I mean, you'd be surprised at some of the files I've been able to read of some of the information that ultimately never did become public, but that you need to know if you're senior campaign staff, again, on the opponent and on your people. And by the way, not even just the candidate, but even senior staffers. It goes both ways there as well.
Absolutely.
So it seems to me they didn't engage in that process. Of course, though, to Yemisi's point, of course, honesty from the candidate himself or herself helps tremendously, right? But you can't count on it even when you work for that candidate.
We got to let Yemisi go. Yemisi, love having you on. Thank you for being here. We look forward to having you back soon here and on the morning meeting. Thank you. And thanks to Kelly for the question. Okay, I want to just tell you about a few other things in the news before we go and back to community questions, just because there are some other things going on here. Mike Rogers is watching the contested Democratic Senate primary in Maine with great fascination to see who's going to be his general election opponent. And his social media team made this AI video paying homage to El Sayed's videos. 14, please. Yeah, I thought it was going to be Mike Rogers dancing, but it was just an AI. Michigan. I think I've said the wrong state. Michigan. Anyway, I'm not going to show you that. RNC midterm convention. According to Politico, they're going to sell tickets for as much as 20 grand. Steve, you going to that thing?
I am not. I'm going to be too busy campaigning. And I don't know if it's a good idea or not, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I don't think it's going to hurt, but I'm not sure it helps.
Yeah. Here's Secretary Duffy about the new airport renaming I mentioned earlier, PBI becoming DJT. 22, please. Those of you listening to the podcast version is just a sign that kind of morphed from PBI to Donald Trump Airport. And Governor Newsom, who's campaigning out west today, talked about the probe by the Justice Department against him and his wife. He says it's, quote, purely political, and that the prosecutors were directed to, quote, find something. All right, back to you for community questions. As you come in, unmute, tell folks where you are and what's on your mind for Steve, and thank you for being part of Two Way.
Okay, hello. It's Zimmy in Marina Del Rey, California. Hello,
Yes, sir.
Steve. Steve was interested in your views on Iran, which I follow very closely. And one of the sources I go to a lot is on YouTube, and I think I've mentioned it to you before, Mark, Tousi TV, Tousi.
You have. Others have mentioned it as well.
This guy, I've watched him since November. And even though he says a lot of things I want to hear, which makes me suspect when you hear someone saying something what you want to hear, everything the guy has said has been right on. And he claims that there is a big what's a group that wants to come in and take over there's an opposition, an underground opposition.
Yeah.
And they're ready to go. And there was also this story about the Kurds being sent in, and they were stopped by Turkey. Trump wanted to send in Israel, and all these people, we're not going to put boots on the ground. We will never put boots on the ground. We won't have people standing around getting blown up and shot by snipers like we had in Iraq. That was ridiculous. This is going to have to be a takeover. And do we have video of 40,000 people being shot? You brought up, Steve, the 40,000 people. It's been said 45,000 people. The government there said 6,000 and something. So obviously it's thousands. And do we have any evidence? If the American people could see this, This is a bully in a region, and there's only one person that can stop the bully, and that's us.
Yeah.
And don't
Steve,
we have
thank
don't
you
we
for
have a
all
moral
that.
duty to do that?
Yep. A lot of points there. Steve, thoughts on everything to be said, please.
Yeah, no, and thank you for the question, Zimi. I will check out Toast. Is it TUOSI? Is that the
TOUSI TV.
TOUSI? Okay,
Big,
I will check that out.
Big fan favorite here in our community, I'll tell you.
Is it? Okay, I'll check it out.
Good.
Look, no one would welcome those forces you're talking about more than I, and I think every American patriot, right, should welcome. Obviously, if you know, we have sacrificed a lot financially. We had people die, right? We had a dozen heroes die in this intervention so far. If it actually results in an evil regime being toppled, either from within or by neighbors, fantastic. But it doesn't seem imminent to me. And again, my expertise though is not military, it's campaigns. And what I'm telling you is the clock is ticking on campaigns. The clock is ticking on the ability to turn sentiment such that we don't have a wipeout in November. And I think that's incredibly consequential, and it limits our action. Look, we are a democracy. In a democracy, you simply can't go to war, to sustain war, without the support of the people unless you want to face electoral ramifications. That's just the reality.
Yeah. Zimmy, thank you. Grateful to you. Need to tell you all about some upcoming stuff. First of all, on 10 o'clock tonight on News Nation, Larry, Kevin, and I will be on. Let's see if we have our hit time, just in case everybody wants to know exactly when we're on. Well, here we go. Don't know what time we're on. Anyway, we'll be on tonight on News Nation.
Well, Mark, I'm on as well, just
hour.
incidentally. I'm on at
All right,
9
what
p.m.
time you're on?
On News Nation. I'm
We're
on
with
Leland
Leland
Bitter's
at
show.
9. All right, we're on with Katie Pavlich at 10:10 tonight. Join us then. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Kevin will be back. It's Friday, winners and losers of the week. Join us for that and what to look for. And of course, this show in 23 hours. New episode of Next Up is posted. My reported monologue is looking at the case of, could Bernie Sanders run for president given his age? You'd be surprised when I play for you his answers about whether he would run. They're far from Sherman-esque. He basically says stuff like, I wouldn't worry about that. His parents, I learned doing reporting for this, died very young. Both died under 60. His brother, though, his only sibling, is 79 or 81, and we've got a video clip of him from a couple years ago. He works in the British Parliament. It gives you good confidence of the Sanders genes. Also look at potential chemistry with potential running mates, because I think part of running, he'd have to have a running mate that people would be confident about. I run through what people in politics, including some close to Sanders, have said. If he does run, how would he try to allay fears that he's too old? I get a lot of pushback on this. People say he's just too old. We've had 2 old presidents, not going to happen. And I'll say now what I say on the program. Everybody's got a problem, right? Gavin Newsom is going to have to run with this California record. That's hard to fix. A lot of people are going to be skeptical about that. He can't fix that. Pete Buttigieg has had trouble winning support from black voters. How's he going to fix that? Kamala Harris has issues. Governor Shapiro and Rahm Emanuel, Jewish Americans, they can't change that. My point is, everybody's got some problems, and I urge you to listen to my walk through why Senator Sanders is potentially the front runner for the nomination, a man who was cheated out of the nomination twice for a party which is more progressive now than 16 and 20 when he was cheated out of the nomination. Finally, I'll say, just to preview what I say in the monologue, he's the leader of a movement. Barack Obama was leader of the movement, won twice. Donald Trump, leader of a movement, won twice. Bernie Sanders, leader of a movement, would have been the nominee twice, but stolen from him twice. No one else is the leader of that movement. Mondami is not the leader. He can't run because he wasn't born here. AOC is not the leader of the movement. So take a listen. And then my guest is Megyn Kelly. We talk about how she likes summer, but we also talk about Vance and Rubio and how they're positioned to deal with potentially being candidates for president in the context of a real feeling within the Republicans, like the Democrats, not super pro foreign intervention, as Steve said, and definitely not as pro Israel as they used to be. Here's a bit of my conversation with Megyn.
Challenge on that. I just feel like maybe I'm just surrounded by it more, but Israel's become such a pariah. I just think as a politician, if you're not ready to say no to AIPAC money and no to backing Israel in its next military endeavor, you're done.
But couldn't he just say, I'm not going to take AIPAC money when I run for president?
No, you have to be able to sell it.
Yeah.
If Marco Rubio said that, that base, that 22% would want to hear a lot more. They'd want to hear why. do you get it? Do you get why we've turned so much? You get why the Iran war was a bad idea? All those things they're going to want to hear. Now, I'm not sure Marco Rubio, or frankly, JD, even on that second question, can sell it all that well.
Right.
I think JD's got more wiggle room, though, because he can at least say he didn't back it and he tried to stop it.
Right. All right. So new episode of Next Up available now on YouTube and as a podcast. And again, we'll see you tomorrow night right here and tomorrow morning on the morning meeting. Steve, love having you on, and thank you for bringing the poll to us. Remind everybody where they can see your stuff.
Yes, please go to @CortesSteve on Twitter, Cortez with an S at the end. You can also go to CortesInvestigates.com. All of my content there, including this new poll.
Okay. Thanks to Steve. Thanks to Yemisi. Thanks to Behnam. And thanks to all of you for being part of the two-way community. I'll see you on News Nation tonight in the 10 o'clock hour and then 9 a.m. tomorrow. Have a great evening, everybody.